Harry had just sat down in the Dursleys' living room when the trouble began. Uncle Vernon was sunk deep in his armchair, muttering at the news. Dudley was scratching out a red F on his recent report card. Aunt Petunia sat stiffly, eyeing the rug as if Harry's mere presence had dirtied it. And then the fireplace exploded. With a blast of soot and a whump, George Weasley tumbled out, coughing and brushing ash from his hair. "Evening," he chirped, as if crashing into other people's homes was a perfectly normal form of greeting. The Dursleys screamed. What? Vernon leapt to his feet, face already purple. Dudley let out a high-pitched squeal, dropping crisps into his lap. Petunia gave a banshee shriek as if burglars had apparated straight into her living room. Before anyone could recover, another whump sounded, and Ron landed in a heap on the carpet, looking immensely pleased with himself. "Worked better than last time," he said, brushing ash off his jumper. Harry grinned, standing to greet them. "Hi, Ron." "Mr. Weasley, what is the meaning of this?" Vernon thundered, spittle flying. You people!" Arthur Weasley ignored him completely and nodded at Harry's trunk. "Right, grab his things, Ron. We'll be off before your uncle's head explodes." Petunia shrieked again as Arthur trod ash across her prized rug. Dudley had pressed himself flat against the wall, staring at them as if they were about to sprout fangs. Arthur took his wand and swished it without a word. The fireplace rebuilt itself orderly and swiftly into a tall brick arch. Ron grabbed Harry's trunk with a grin. "You ready, mate?" "Been ready for weeks," Harry said. "Stop! You can't just..." Vernon began, but George gave him a look so casual and mischievous that he fell silent mid-sputter. The twins had that effect, and before another word could be shouted, Harry, Ron and Arthur vanished in a whirl of green flames. Harry stumbled out of the fireplace into the Burrows' kitchen, coughing as soot puffed around him. The room was alive with warmth and movement, pots clanging on their own, Molly's knitting needles clacking in the corner, the smell of stew and bread filling the air. "Harry, dear!" Molly Weasley swooped in, brushing ash from his shoulders before pulling him into a hug. "There you are. I've been waiting all day. Sit, you need feeding." Ron came tumbling out of the fireplace next, grinning. "Told you it'd work," he said, dusting himself off. Before Harry could reply, Hermione hurried down the stairs, her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Harry," she said, sounding almost relieved. She sat beside him at the table, giving him one of those warm, grounding smiles that always made the tension in his chest ease. The table was crowded. At the far end sat Amos Diggory, large and booming, gesturing wildly with a mug in hand as he spoke. Next to him was Cedric, tall and composed, his posture neat even in the Burrows' cosy chaos. "Harry Potter!" Amos exclaimed when he spotted him. "Well, here's a sight. Our Cedric's told us about you. Fine flyer, he says, but not quite as fine as him, eh?" He gave Cedric a hearty slap on the back. Cedric, flushing slightly, rose to shake Harry's hand. "Good to meet you properly," he said with a polite smile. Harry shook his hand, struck by how steady and grounded Cedric seemed. "Cedric beat you last season, didn't he?" Amos went on cheerfully. "Fair and square, too." "No, Dad," Cedric said quickly, a little firm. "The match was cancelled." Harry flew brilliantly, given all the Dementors Molly cut across before Amos could launch into another round of boasting. "Never mind Quidditch right now. Food first. Harry, dear, you'll take another roll, won't you?" The kitchen filled with the usual Burrow chaos. Molly fussing, Ginny stealing food when Molly wasn't looking, Ron trying to keep up with Amos's booming conversation, and Hermione gently steering things back to order. Harry found himself smiling as he dug into his stew. The noise, the warmth, the sheer life of the Burrow. After a summer of cold silence at the Dursleys, it felt like coming home. Upstairs, Harry sat cross-legged on the floor of Ron's room, surrounded by Ron, Hermione, Ginny and Fred and George, the warm glow of a single lamp lighting their circle. Fred lazily levitated a chocolate frog card between his fingers. "So, Harry, he said with a sly grin. Are you prepared for tomorrow? Biggest sporting event in the world. No pressure. I think I can manage watching, Harry said dryly, which earned him a round of chuckles. Ron leaned forward, eyes shining. But you don't understand, Harry. The World Cup is massive. Bulgaria, Ireland, firework displays, mascots. It's going to be brilliant. Assuming, said Hermione, that the Bulgarians don't spend the entire match fouling. She gave Ron a pointed look. Ron waved her off. It's Quidditch, Hermione. Fouls are part of the fun. Ginny, perched on her bed, hugged her knees and smirked. Don't let him fool you, Harry. He's already planning out how to copy Crumb's moves in the garden when we get back. Too right I am, Ron said, unbothered. Best seeker in the world. Hermione rolled her eyes, but her smile betrayed her amusement. She turned to Harry. How was your summer, really? You didn't write much? Harry hesitated. The usual with the Dursleys. They tried to keep me out of sight most of the time. I'm just glad to be here. He gave a small shrug, and the others exchanged a quiet look of understanding. To shift the mood, George clapped his hands. Well, enough gloom. Fred and I have been working on something revolutionary. Portable fireworks. Perfect for any occasion. Birthdays, weddings, ministry inquiries. Detention, Fred added with mock solemnity. Hermione sighed. You'll get yourselves expelled one of these days. Worth it, George said. Ron shook his head but grinned. You'll thank them when they're rich and famous, Hermione. Famous for what? Ruining exams? She shot back, though her lips twitched. The room filled with laughter, the kind that made the burrow's crooked walls feel even warmer. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Hermione was already bustling about Ron's room, hands on her hips. Come on, Ron, we'll be late, she said, tugging at his blankets. Ron groaned and buried his face into his pillow. 5 more minutes. That's what you said 5 minutes ago, Hermione retorted, exasperated. When he muttered the same excuse again, she finally shoved his shoulder, and with a muffled yelp, Ron toppled half onto the floor, hair sticking out at odd angles. Oi! That's abuse, he mumbled, fumbling for his socks. Hermione ignored him and moved to Harry's bed, kneeling slightly as she gave his shoulder the gentlest shake. Harry, it's time to leave. Harry blinked awake, rubbing his eyes. See, now why do I get the polite wake-up call? Because you don't take 5 more minutes as a lifestyle, she said, trying not to smile. Harry chuckled and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Fair point. Let's go rescue Ron before he falls asleep in his shoe. Downstairs, the burrow smelled of toast and tea. Molly Weasley was already waiting with a basket of packed lunches, thrusting sandwiches into each child's hands as they rushed about. Eat them on the way, dears, she said firmly, planting a kiss on Ginny's head and tugging Fred's scarf into place. When Harry approached, she paused, her expression softening. With a gentle hand, she tilted his crooked glasses straight and cupped his face, as though checking he was really there. Now, Harry, you have a good time. Don't you worry about a thing, she said warmly, her eyes lingering on him longer than the rest. Harry felt his throat tighten slightly, but he nodded, clutching his lunch. Thanks, Mrs. Weasley. Molly pulled him into a quick, motherly hug before bustling off to chase Fred and George, who were attempting to sneak extra sandwiches into their pockets. The group spilled out into the yard, the cool morning air buzzing with excitement. The air was damp and cool beneath the trees, each breath carrying the earthy scent of moss and pine. Branches swayed high above, spilling pockets of sunlight across the dirt trail. Harry and Cedric had drifted toward the back of the group, their shoes crunching twigs in an uneven rhythm. For a while, neither spoke. Then Cedric cleared his throat. You know, he said, glancing sideways at Harry, I always wondered, what class do you actually like best? You don't strike me as a potions fan, Harry snorted. Potions is near the bottom of the list, trust me. Snape hates me too much for me even to have a chance of enjoying it. Honestly, defense against the dark arts. At least it feels like the stuff we learn there might matter someday. Cedric nodded slowly, eyes fixed ahead on the winding path. Makes sense. I've always liked charms. There's something satisfying about little spells that actually work in everyday life. Last summer, I enchanted our broom shed to open itself when you tapped the handle. Saved me about 2 seconds every morning. That's brilliant, Harry said with a grin. Bet your dad loved that. Cedric chuckled. He told me I was wasting my time when I could have been practicing summoning. Then used it every day without fail. Parents. They walked on in silence for a stretch, the trail beginning to slope upward. The trees thinned in patches, offering brief glimpses of a pale blue sky. What about Quidditch? Cedric asked after a pause. Still your favourite thing about Hogwarts? Yeah, Harry said without hesitation. His eyes flicked upward, as though picturing the pitch. Definitely. Closest I ever feel to being free, I guess. Nothing but the sky, the wind, and the snitch. Cedric's expression softened, his voice dropping quieter. I get that. Same for me. Quidditch is the one time I don't feel like I have to prove anything. It's just me doing what I love. Everything else, classes, my dad, schoolwork, it fades when you're up there. Harry looked at him, surprised at the honesty. Cedric gave a small shrug, embarrassed at having said so much. Guess we've got that in common, Harry said. They moved past a fallen log, Arthur and Amos's laughter faint in the distance. After a while, Cedric leaned closer, lowering his voice. Can I ask you something a little personal? Harry hesitated. Depends what it is. Cedric's grin returned. Don't panic. Just wondering if you like anyone. You've got half of Gryffindor staring at you most of the time. Figured someone must have caught your eye. Harry stumbled over a root, nearly tripping. His face went hot. I don't... Why would you even... Cedric laughed quietly, raising a hand. Relax, I'm not asking you to confess your undying love or anything. Just making conversation. He paused, then added, For what it's worth, everyone assumes I'm dating Cho. Truth is, we're not together. She's brilliant, no doubt about it. I don't think I've ever really noticed her the way people expect me to. Not enough, anyway. He kicked a stone off the path, his expression thoughtful. It gets tiring, you know? Having everyone decide who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to want. Sometimes I just want to tell them to shut up and let me figure it out. Harry felt a strange kinship stir. Yeah, I know that feeling. People project things onto you. Boy who lived this, Dumbledore's favourite that. Sometimes I don't even feel like I'm allowed to be normal. Cedric turned his head, studying him. That's exactly it. You're not just Harry to them, and I'm not just Cedric. We're these ideas people argue about. But walking here with you, it's different. You're just a bloke about my age, and I'm just another student trying to survive nets. Harry let out a small laugh, genuine this time. You make it sound almost easy. Well, Cedric said with a crooked smile, for today, maybe it can be. Just two blokes walking through the woods. The trail levelled out, spilling them into a wide meadow where the morning mist clung low to the grass. Ahead, Hermione's voice carried as she urged Ron to pick up the pace. Cedric glanced toward the sound, then back at Harry. I've got a feeling this year's going to test both of us, he said quietly. When it does, maybe we can keep each other honest. Harry nodded, feeling something settle in his chest that wasn't rivalry, wasn't suspicion. It was the start of a bond, quiet but real. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." The meadow stretched wide and silver with dew, the grass whispering against their legs as the group pushed onward. A soft mist hovered low, curling like smoke around their boots. Arthur and Amos marched at the front like seasoned scouts, pointing out faint markers along the ridge and laughing at their own inside jokes. Ron trudged several paces behind, muttering, "Thought the whole point of the portkey was avoiding this sort of hike," which earned him a sharp nudge from Hermione and a grin from Fred. Harry and Cedric lingered together near the middle, their earlier conversation still hanging in the air between them, warmer now and less stiff. Harry noticed how Cedric's easy stride seemed to set the pace for both of them, unhurried but steady, like someone used to long Quidditch drills in all weather. The climb grew steeper, trees thinning into gorse and heather. The sun was breaking over the ridge now, gilding everything in gold and making the damp meadow glow. Up ahead, Ginny leapt onto a flat rock and shaded her eyes. "I think I see it," she called. Arthur cupped his hands around his mouth. "Nearly there, everyone!" "Just up the hill!" A chorus of groans followed from Ron, Fred and George, but Amos laughed heartily, clapping Arthur on the back. "They'll thank us for the exercise when they're older." Cedric shook his head with a grin. "That's my dad for you. Finds joy in everything, even uphill climbs." They reached the crest of the hill, breath misting in the cool air. There, tucked against a patch of thistles, stood the oddest object. An old, battered boot, half buried in mud, its laces trailing like limp vines. "Gather round," Arthur called cheerfully. "Everyone make sure you've got a finger on it. No more, no less. We don't want anyone left behind." The group clustered together, jostling and nudging as they bent toward the portkey. Harry glanced across the huddle at Cedric, whose hand settled on the boot with practiced ease. Their eyes met, and Cedric gave him a small, steady nod. Just two blokes walking through the woods. Harry remembered his words and the reassurance in them. "All right," Amos said, his voice brimming with excitement. 3, 2, 1. The world yanked out from under Harry's feet. His stomach lurched as though hooked by a giant, invisible hand. Wind roared in his ears, the boot glowed white-hot beneath their grip, and the hilltop blurred into nothing. Harry hit the ground with a jolt, his knees sinking into soft grass that smelled faintly of wild mint. He staggered upright, brushing himself off, and his jaw nearly dropped. They stood on the edge of a massive valley, ringed with gentle hills that dipped and rose like waves frozen in earth. Sprawled across the valley floor were tents, thousands of them, dotting the landscape in every shape and size imaginable. Yet these were no ordinary tents. Some shimmered faintly, their fabric woven with charms that caught the morning light and refracted it like glass. Others pulsed with slow, glowing runes that shifted colours as though alive. One tent, shaped like a miniature castle, had turrets that actually rotated, while another resembled a dragon's head, nostrils sending out harmless wisps of green smoke that dissipated into the air. Flags fluttered above every camp, painted in brilliant scarlets, emeralds and blues. National crests and Quidditch team symbols waving proudly. The scent of roasting meats and spiced bread wafted on the breeze, mingling with the sound of laughter, fiddles and crackling fires. Somewhere nearby, a group of Irish supporters had enchanted their tent to play jaunty bagpipe music that drifted out into the valley. Wizards and witches bustled everywhere, children darting between tents with toy broomsticks, their tiny sparks trailing like fireflies. Adults conjured tables laden with food, or reclined on floating chairs that hovered a foot above the grass. A few reckless sorts were already flying a little too low on broomsticks, only to be shouted at by ministry officials in bright yellow vests attempting to enforce order. Arthur beamed at the sight, his voice hushed with awe, though he'd been here before. Magnificent, isn't it? A whole world of us, together and out in the open for just a little while. Harry's chest swelled as he took it all in. He had never seen wizard kind gathered like this, so unabashedly themselves, so vibrant and proud. For a fleeting moment, he felt he wasn't just a boy dropped into a strange hidden world. He was part of something vast, something alive. Beside him, Cedric let out a low whistle. "You think you've seen a crowd before," he said, "but this is something else." Amos was already marching ahead, calling over his shoulder, "Come on, campsite's this way. Let's get ourselves settled before the Irish start singing again." The group followed, weaving their way through the valley, Harry trying to drink in every detail. The floating lanterns strung between poles, the magical fireworks spelling team names across the sky, the camaraderie and chaos of an entire world celebrating its sport. It was, he thought, the most magical sight he had ever seen. The Weasleys' campsite turned out to be a little patch of uneven grass on the slope of a hill, wedged between a perfectly square Bulgarian tent that emitted faint drum beats and a French tent draped with shimmering silver fabric that glittered even without sunlight. Arthur led them in with his arms spread like a tour guide. "Here we are. Home sweet home." Harry eyed the Weasley tent. It was small, sagging a little at one corner, the canvas patched in places with mismatched fabric. Beside it, Amos was already unpacking the Diggory's tent, which looked almost new, its ropes taut and enchanted pegs glinting. Ron groaned. "Dad, that thing looks like it'll fall over if a gnome sneezes on it." Arthur puffed his chest out proudly. "Nonsense. Sturdy as anything, this one." Ministry-approved Fred leaned close to George and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's what he said about the flying car." Inside, Harry was stunned to find not a cramped canvas space, but a cosy little flat with 3 small bedrooms, a stove, and even a sitting room. The air smelled faintly of old wood smoke and cabbage. Arthur turned from the now smoking kettle. "Now, everyone settle in. We'll have some tea before heading to explore the grounds. And mind you, this table has crack." One of the table legs splintered loudly, the whole thing tipping sideways so the kettle rolled onto the carpet. George winced and quickly levitated it back upright before Arthur turned around. "Survived generations of Weasleys," Arthur finished, completely oblivious. Fred patted the table lovingly. "And it'll survive a few more." The tent creaked softly in the evening wind, its canvas glowing faintly from the lanterns Molly had set about. Most of the family had drifted off into their little rooms or were still outside laughing with the Diggorys. Harry found himself sitting on the warm sofa with Ginny curled up at one end and Hermione cross-legged on the carpet, quill in hand as if she couldn't quite let go of her notes even here. For a moment, there was only the sound of the kettle whistling faintly in the adjoining room. Then Ginny broke the silence with a grin. "Not bad, is it? From the outside it looks like a sagging laundry bag, but in here," she gestured around at the magically expanded space, "it's practically a palace." Harry chuckled. "Beats my cupboard under the stairs, that's for sure." Hermione shot him a look, half sympathy, half irritation that he could joke about it so easily. "Honestly, Harry, that still makes me so angry when I think about it." Harry shrugged, though the corner of his mouth lifted. "It makes for a good comparison now, doesn't it? My standards for comfort are very low." Ginny smirked. "Well then, wait until you see the World Cup stands tomorrow. Dad says they're enchanted, so no matter where you sit, it feels like the best view in the place." Harry leaned back, stretching his legs out. "I've never been to a proper Quidditch match. Only the Hogwarts games, and those usually involve me nearly falling off my broom or being chased by something that wants me dead." "Don't forget the Dementors," Hermione added quietly. Ginny wrinkled her nose. "Leave it to Hogwarts to make Quidditch life-threatening. Tomorrow will be different. You'll actually get to enjoy it." Harry smiled at her enthusiasm, then glanced at Hermione. "What about you? Excited?" Hermione tapped her quill against her knee. "Well, I'm not as mad about Quidditch as you two, but I suppose seeing the different national teams will be interesting. Different styles, strategies, almost like cultural study through sport. Ginny groaned good-naturedly. Trust you to make Quidditch sound like a homework assignment. Hermione sniffed, though a smile tugged at her lips. Everything can be a learning opportunity if you look at it the right way. Harry laughed, shaking his head. You two are impossible. Ginny tilted her head, her expression softening as she studied Harry. You seem lighter. Happier than when we saw you last. The Dursleys didn't give you too much trouble, did they? Harry hesitated, then shrugged again. They tried, but I had Ron's letters and Hermione's and... He hesitated, realising too late. Well, it wasn't so bad this time. Hermione's eyes warmed, but she didn't press. Ginny reached out and nudged his hand with hers, quick and subtle, before leaning back as though it hadn't happened. Tomorrow's going to be brilliant, Ginny said firmly, breaking the little pause. No Dursleys, no classes, no worries. Just fly-in, cheer-in and fireworks. Fireworks? Harry asked. Ginny smirked. Fred and George, obviously. You didn't think they'd come to the biggest sporting event of the decade empty-handed, did you? Hermione groaned again, rubbing her temples. If they get us all thrown out before the match even starts, I'll hex them myself. The night outside the tents was alive with sound. Distant pops of fireworks, the rise and fall of laughter, the occasional whoosh of a broomstick darting overhead. Lanterns swayed on their hooks, casting golden pools of light over the uneven grass. Harry stepped out for some fresh air, rubbing the back of his neck, and nearly walked into Cedric. Cedric was standing with a girl Harry hadn't met before, though he knew instantly who she was. She was laughing at something Cedric had said, her hair catching the glow of the lanterns.
Harry, Cedric said warmly, straightening up. Just the person.
There's someone I'd like you to meet, he gestured to the girl. This is Cho Chang, Ravenclaw's chaser. Harry froze for half a second before finding his voice. Oh, hi, he managed, wishing he didn't sound so awkward. Cho smiled, her expression kind and slightly amused. Hi, Harry. I already know who you are. Her laugh that followed was light, unforced, and it disarmed him completely. He pushed his glasses higher up his nose, cheeks warming. Cedric, grinning, folded his arms. Harry here's not bad on a broom himself. You've probably heard of some of his games. That tugged Harry into speaking more quickly than he meant to. Actually, I've seen you play, he blurted, glancing at Cho. The Slytherin match last year. You dodged Montague like it was nothing. He didn't touch the quaffle once when you were near it. Cho blinked, surprised. Then her smile widened. You remember that? Harry nodded, suddenly aware of how hot his ears felt. Yeah, you're really good. Her eyes softened. Thanks. That means a lot coming from you. You've got a reputation for flying like you were born to it. Harry couldn't help but grin, though it came out a little crooked. I don't know about that. More like I've just fallen off my broom enough times to get the hang of it. Cedric laughed, shaking his head. Understatement. Watching you two on the pitch makes the rest of us look like we're crawling. Cho nudged him lightly. Don't let him fool you, Harry. Cedric's one of the most solid flyers I've ever seen. Solid, sure, Cedric said with mock resignation. Reliable, which is just a polite way of saying not flashy. Harry chuckled, feeling the tension slip out of his shoulders. The conversation found its rhythm, flowing from Quidditch matches to the sheer excitement of the World Cup. Cedric chimed in here and there, but more often than not he just leaned back, letting Harry and Cho talk. When Cho mentioned her favourite team, the Tutsil Tornadoes, Harry wrinkled his nose. Tornadoes? Really? They're all speed, no substance. They're brilliant, Cho shot back, mock-offended. You just don't appreciate style. I appreciate winning, Harry retorted, but his grin gave him away. Cho's laugh rang out, light and genuine, and Harry found himself laughing too, the sound rising into the cool night air. After a while, Cedric spotted his father calling from a distance. He excused himself with a knowing smile. "I'll leave you two to it." "Don't let Harry talk you into changing teams, Cho." Once Cedric had gone, Harry found himself standing beside her in a quieter pocket of lantern light. The noise of the campgrounds carried around them, but for a moment it felt as though they had stepped out of the chaos. Cho tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, studying him. "You know, I thought you'd be different." Harry blinked. "Different?" She tilted her head, smiling. "Louder, maybe. More showy. But you're, well, kind of normal." He laughed, though it came out a little nervously. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It was one," she said softly. For the first time all evening, Harry forgot to feel self-conscious. He just looked at her, the way her eyes caught the flicker of lantern fire, and thought that perhaps he didn't mind standing here at all. A voice called from the Weasleys' tent, breaking the spell. Harry startled. "That'll be Mrs. Weasley. I should—" "Of course," Cho said, her smile lingering. "See you tomorrow, Harry." He nodded, a little dazed, and turned back toward the tent. His heart was still thudding as though he'd just taken a dive from 100 feet up. The stands were a storm of noise and colour, like someone had bottled a thunderclap and let it loose. Enchanted banners rippled above the crowd, green fire against scarlet sparks, and voices boomed from every corner of the stadium. Harry could hardly hear himself think, and he didn't care.
Fred collapsed into his chair with a theatrical sigh. "Well, Georgie, time to watch Ireland wipe the floor with Bulgaria." George folded his arms like a commentator. "By no less than 50 points, mark my words." Ron nearly tripped as he whirled around to face them, gaping. "Are you mental? 50? You think Ireland can hold off Crumb?" Fred smirked. "Hold off? They won't need to hold off when they've already scored 100 goals." "They can score all they like," Ron shot back, eyes flashing. "The snitch wins the match. And Crumb's the best seeker in the world. End of discussion." George shook his head sadly at Harry. "Tragic, isn't it? Watching a brother fall to such dangerous delusions." "I'm not delusional," Ron bellowed, jabbing a finger towards the pitch as if Crumb were already there. "You'll see." "Crumb'll catch it in 10 minutes flat." Hermione, wedged between Harry and Ginny, rolled her eyes. "Really, Ron, you sound like you're in love with him." "I'm not," Ron spluttered, his ears flaming. "I just respect talent. That's all." Fred gasped dramatically, clutching his heart. "Respect talent? Listen to him, George. It's worse than we thought." Harry doubled over, laughing as Ron turned scarlet, waving his hands in protest. Before the twins could pile on another round of teasing, a magically magnified voice rolled across the pitch like thunder. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 422nd Quidditch World Cup." The stadium erupted. The stands shook beneath a tidal wave of cheers. Harry felt the noise vibrate in his chest. Ron leapt to his feet, hollering, "Crumb!" so loudly a wizard 3 rows ahead turned to glare at him. "Sit down before you burst a lung," Hermione muttered, tugging on his sleeve. Fred cupped his hands and bellowed even louder, "Ireland!" George joined him, and their voices blended into a deafening chorus. They stamped their feet until the planks of the stand rattled, then threw their arms around each other like Ireland had already won. The banter only stopped when Arthur stiffened at the edge of their row. Lucius Malfoy was descending the stairs, Draco at his shoulder, both of them smirking as if the entire box belonged to them. Arthur straightened, his smile polite but firm. "Evening, Malfoy." "Fine view up here, isn't it?" Lucius's pale eyes flicked over the group. "Some of us prefer the minister's box. More
Respectable company. His gaze slid toward Harry. Enjoy the match, Potter. Try not to fall off your seat. Draco grinned, adding, enjoy the match with your fake family. Harry half rose, fists clenched, but Hermione yanked him back down. Not now, she hissed. The Malfoys swept lower, their cloaks trailing behind. The second they were gone, Fred leaned forward and muttered, respectable company, my arse. Language! Molly snapped automatically, though her eyes twinkled. Harry could barely catch his breath from laughing. Then he noticed Cedric turning from the row below, waving up at him. Beside Cedric was Cho Chang, clapping politely as the Bulgarian mascot spilled onto the pitch. Her hair caught the glow of the lanterns, and Harry went suddenly, stupidly still. She glanced back and offered the faintest smile before turning again. Harry's stomach flipped. Before he could untangle the feeling, the air itself seemed to hum. The Bulgarian team streaked onto the pitch in a thunder of crimson robes and broomsticks. They sliced the sky in dazzling formation, the crowd gasping as Victor Crumb himself dove, skimming the grass in a suicidal plunge before pulling up at the last possible second. From the ground below, a flood of leprechauns soared into the air, their laughter ringing as they scattered golden glitter across the pitch. The lanterns dimmed. Fudge's voice thundered across the stadium one last time. Let the match begin! And with a blinding flash of gold and scarlet, the quaffle soared into the air. The whistle shrieked and the game erupted into chaos. 14 players shot into the sky like fireworks, robes a blur of emerald and crimson. The quaffle streaked toward the Irish chasers, who snatched it with seamless precision. They've got it! They've got it! Fred yelled, hopping up and nearly knocking Ginny's drink over. Don't get too excited, George warned. It's only the first. Yes! Yes, Lynch! The Irish chaser wove past a Bulgarian beater, spun midair and hurled the quaffle through the far hoop. Gold sparks exploded in the air. Ireland scores! Fudge's magnified voice boomed. The Irish fans thundered. Leprechauns zicked out of nowhere, showering golden glitter like a rainstorm. Harry had to shield his eyes, laughing as Fred tried to catch handfuls midair. Free money! Fred whooped. It vanishes after a few seconds, you prat! Hermione shouted over the noise, batting glitter off her lap. Still free! Fred yelled, stuffing a fistful into his pocket as it fizzled away. But then the Bulgarians swept back with brute force. 2 chasers charged, passing the quaffle in perfect sync. They slipped past the Irish keeper and... Bulgaria! Ron bellowed, springing to his feet. Yes! That's what I'm talking about! Harry laughed, but his eyes kept darting skyward. High above, Crumb hovered with predatory focus, his sharp eyes scanning the pitch like a hawk. Across from him, Aidan Lynch of Ireland darted nervously, his gaze flicking everywhere at once. The crowd screamed as Ireland netted another 2 goals. Their passing was dazzling, like green blurs circling faster and faster. The Vila had launched into their dance, spiralling through the air in glittering waves. The effect was immediate. Half the wizards in the stands leaned dangerously over the rails, enchanted smiles plastered on their faces. Ron actually stood on his seat, arms outstretched as if preparing to leap. Hermione grabbed his jumper and yanked him down with surprising force. You are not about to break your neck over some dancers. I wasn't, Ron started, then realised he was indeed halfway over the railing. Oh. His ears went scarlet. Right. The match surged on. Ireland scored again. And again. The twins were leaping on their seats, hugging each other, while Ron sat stony-faced, muttering about how goals didn't matter. Then, Crumb dives! Fudge roared. The entire stadium gasped. Crumb had plummeted like a cannonball, broomstick a red streak, arm outstretched. Lynch shot after him, screaming downward. The crowd leaned as one, voices blending into a single roar. They've seen the snitch! Harry shouted, standing with everyone else. They haven't, Fred cried. It's a feint, watch, watch! Sure enough, Crumb pulled up at the last second, soaring back into the sky with impossible control. Lynch, blinded by speed, smashed straight into the ground with a sickening crunch. The crowd erupted in laughter, groans, and cheers. Fudge's voice boomed, "Foul play!" but was drowned out by the chaos. Ron was cackling. "Did you see his face? Straight into the dirt, because Crumb tricked him." The match continued in a frenzy. Ireland's chasers put on a masterclass, goal after goal after goal, until the scoreboard practically glowed emerald. The leprechauns whooped with every score, golden light flooding the air. But then Crumb struck again, diving, this time true. "Snitch!" Ron screamed so loudly Harry thought his throat might split. Harry's eyes darted up, and there it was, glimmering gold against the night sky. Crumb arrowed toward it, weaving past beaters, ignoring a bludger that narrowly missed his head. Lynch, still woozy but determined, tore after him. The twins grabbed each other, shrieking, "No, no, no!" like madmen. Crumb stretched, fingers brushing gold. The whistle blew. The stadium erupted as Crumb clutched the snitch, fist raised high. Bulgaria had the Seeker's glory. But when the scoreboard blazed its final tally, it told a different story. Ireland had won by points. Ron collapsed against the rail, utterly betrayed. "No, no, that's not, no!" Fred and George toppled into their seats, clutching their sides with laughter. "We won! We won! We have to find Bagman! We're rich!" Hermione cheered with them, while Ron sulked into his seat. Harry couldn't stop grinning. The match had been chaos and brilliance and magic all at once. The air still shimmered with golden sparks, the crowd still roaring in disbelief. And Harry thought he'd never seen anything like it in his life. The Irish camp had turned into a festival ground. Green banners waved like enchanted flames, leprechauns spun overhead showering the crowd with sparks, and music thundered from enchanted fiddles that played themselves. Wizards danced, laughed, and lifted mugs of butterbeer, their voices filling the night. Fred and George had disappeared for a time, but returned triumphant, arms weighed down with jingling bags. "We bet on Ireland to win, but Crumb to catch the snitch," George crowed, shaking the bag so the coins clinked like rainfall. Fred grinned wickedly. "We're rich!" Entrepreneurs of destiny. Or cheats of destiny, Hermione muttered, crossing her arms, though she couldn't suppress a smile. Ron sulked near the fire. "You probably travelled back in time to win that bet." "Possibly." "You're just jealous," Fred teased, tossing a single coin at Ron, who let it bounce off his chest without moving. Lanterns glowed warmly against the canvas walls, and the smell of butterbeer and treacle still lingered from snacks Molly had set aside before leaving. Fred and George had practically turned the sitting area into a commentator's box, reenacting Crumb's daring dive and the Irish chasers' seamless passing game with wild hand gestures. "Did you see Moran's feint?" Fred cried, leaping onto a stool. "She fooled half the pitch! A thing of beauty, I tell you!" "Not half the pitch," George corrected. "All of it, including Ron, who nearly fell over the rail screaming. "I was cheering!" Ron shouted, his face red. "You just don't understand Crumb's brilliance." Fred put on a mock-serious expression. "Ah, yes. Brilliance is what you call catching the snitch after your team's already 160 points behind." "Best seeker in the world," Ron shot back hotly, thumping his chest as if to seal the truth of it. Ginny rolled her eyes, sitting cross-legged on the rug. "If you two don't shut it, we'll all have to reenact Crumb's fall ourselves when this tent collapses from your stomping." That earned a laugh from Harry, who had been leaning back just watching the chaos. The tension of the day seemed to drain from him with every joke and every interruption. The joy of the Quidditch World Cup had burned itself out, leaving only dying embers of firelight and the tired murmurs of families retreating to their tents. The night was settling into stillness, until the first scream split the air. It wasn't a cheer, it wasn't laughter, it was raw terror. The The ground quivered under Harry's feet as he stumbled outside the tent, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny close behind. At once his breath caught. A dozen figures in black cloaks and silver masks swept across the campsite like a tide of shadow. They moved in jagged lines, blasting tents apart with cruel flicks of their wands. Canvas exploded into flame, lighting their path in lurid orange. Families shrieked and scattered. Sparks rained down like falling stars. Harry froze. His eyes locked on a man and woman with their children, flailing helplessly in the air above the Death Eaters. Their limbs twisted unnaturally as masked wizards jeered, sending them spinning higher. The laughter was high, shrill, and gleeful. Mockery sharpened into cruelty. Arthur's voice rang out, sharp with urgency. "Move! Into the woods, now!" The Weasleys shoved forward, but Harry caught the glint of fire on silver masks, closing in. Fred and George didn't run. They darted to the sides of their younger siblings, wands raised, faces set in grim determination. The woods offered little safety. Families crashed through the undergrowth all around, children sobbing, mothers calling names into the darkness. Branches snapped under the stampede. The glow of fires licked at the tree trunks, casting everything in a sick, violent red. Behind them, the chaos only grew. Tents erupted, one by one, shrieking as their spells collapsed. More muggles were dragged screaming into the sky. Their cries echoed across the fields, carrying a sound of helplessness Harry had never heard before. Hermione's hand clamped tightly around Harry's arm as they stumbled into a clearing. "They're toying with them," she whispered, horrified. "They're not even killing, they're—" She trailed off, her face pale. Ron's voice was raw. "They're showing off." Arthur turned, face set in iron. "Stay here. Do not leave this spot. Fred, George, you're the eldest. Protect them." His eyes burned with a mix of fear and resolve before he vanished back toward the fires. For a moment, they were left with only the flicker of distant flame and the echo of cruel laughter. Then, screams again. Parents pulled children closer, wands clutched with trembling hands. Fred stood taller, wand still at the ready, his voice steady despite the chaos. "No one touches Ron. No one touches Ginny. That's final." George nodded grimly, shoulders squared. "Let them try." The group crashed through the underbrush, branches clawing at their arms and cloaks as they stumbled into a small clearing lit faintly by the moon. The world behind them was still alive with chaos, shrieks, roars of fire, and the pounding of countless feet. But here, for a brief moment, the trees muffled the worst of it. Fred and George immediately turned back to back, wands raised, scanning the tree line as though they were aurors on patrol. Fred grabbed Ron by the shoulder, yanking him closer. "Stay with us," he ordered, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. Ron, breathing hard, looked taken aback, but didn't argue. Ginny clutched his sleeve, eyes wide and wet, and George slipped to her other side, protective as a guard dog. Harry bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. The mark of panic still tingled in his chest. Hermione stumbled in after them, pale and furious, her curls matted with leaves. "This is madness," she said breathlessly, voice shaking more than she wanted it to. "The Ministry, how could they let this happen?" They knew tensions were high. They knew. Arthur came crashing in a moment later with Amos Diggory close behind, both men tense and trying to sound calm for the sake of the younger ones. "Stay together, all of you," Arthur said firmly, ushering them toward the center of the clearing. "Keep your wands out, but don't fire unless you absolutely have to. Panic hexes in this confusion will only hurt people." From the distance, a woman screamed, cut off by a harsh laugh. The glow of firelight pulsed between the trees like the beat of a sick heart. Cedric burst in then, holding Cho's wrist as he led her, keeping her close. His face was set, serious, nothing like the warm boy Harry had shared jokes with earlier that day. "They're moving in lines," Cedric reported quickly, like he'd seen this before. "They're hunting, forcing muggles out of their tents." Cho pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. She was trembling, but her eyes were sharp as she scanned the woods. Harry caught her expression, that mix of fear and resolve, and felt a strange jolt in his chest. Fred muttered under his breath, "If they come this way." His voice had a dangerous edge, one Harry rarely heard. George gave a fierce nod. "They'll regret it." The twins shifted slightly, tightening their line around Ron and Ginny. It was an instinctive move, a protective wall that made Harry realise, for the first time, how far the Weasley bond ran beneath their usual teasing. For a moment, the clearing was silent, only the sound of ragged breathing and distant screams. Then the night split apart. With a flash like lightning, a streak of green fire carved upward into the sky. It swirled and coiled, twisting itself into a skull so vast it seemed to blot out the stars. From the skull's gaping mouth a serpent uncoiled, slithering endlessly into the night. The clearing was bathed in green light. It flooded over the trees, painted the trunks with ghostly glow, and caught in Harry's glasses. His eyes reflected it back like two emerald flames, the colour so sharp it seemed to burn inside him. Gasps tore through the crowd. Ginny whimpered and pressed her face into Ron's sleeve, while Fred and George spread out on either side, their wands raised, shielding their younger siblings. Then, cracks. Loud, sharp, multiplying. Ministry wizards apparated into the clearing, one after another, cloaks whipping behind them. "Wands up!" a voice barked. Spells flew before anyone could explain. Jets of red and yellow light snapped across the clearing, tearing chunks of bark from trees, sending sparks ricocheting through the branches. One blast hit the ground so close that dirt and leaves showered over Harry's shoes. "Stop!" Arthur Weasley shouted, throwing himself between the teenagers and the advancing wizards. "They're children!" "Do you hear me? Children!" But confusion ruled. Ministry officials barked orders over one another, their faces pale as they stared at the mark looming overhead. Every curse, every counter-curse they fired lit the clearing in brief, violent flashes. Red, green, blue, like a battlefield erupting all around them. The serpent in the sky seemed to pulse, its light throbbing in time with the panic below. Harry's scar prickled faintly as he stared up at it, the green glow burning in his eyes. It felt alive, watching, mocking. For the first time, Harry felt the world tilt beneath him, not just fear, but the sense of something inevitable, something returning. The Dark Lord's shadow was no longer past. It was present. Suddenly, a sharp cry came from the edge of the clearing. A pair of wizards stumbled forward, dragging something small and struggling between them. It was Winky, the house elf, her wide eyes wild with terror, a wand clutched tightly in her trembling hands. "She had it," one wizard roared. "She's the one." Gasps tore through the onlookers. Ron gawked, pale. "An elf? You think she did that?" Winky kicked and wailed, her squeaky voice shrill. "No, not Winky! Winky not cast! Winky only obeys! Winky—" Before she could finish, a furious shout split the air. "Disgrace!" Barty Crouch Sr. stormed into the clearing, his robes snapping like whips behind him, his face flushed with rage. He looked 10 years older in that light, his eyes bloodshot and burning. He seized the elf by the arm, shaking her so hard her sobs doubled. "My elf, my servant, caught with a wand at the scene of this outrage." His voice was hoarse but carried, his words like hammer blows. "How dare you bring such shame on me?" "Sir, she had the wand," began one of the Aurors, but Crouch cut across him with venom. "Do not, sir, me. I will deal with this. I will deal with her." His eyes flicked to the teenagers, to Harry, Cedric, and the Weasleys. For a brief moment, Harry thought Crouch was looking for guilt in them too, hungrily, desperately, as though the mark demanded someone to blame, anyone at all. Hermione's face had gone white, her fists clenched at her sides. "It's not right," she whispered furiously to Harry. Look at her, she's terrified. He doesn't care about truth, he only cares about appearances. The clearing roiled with mutters, shouts, the clash of orders as wizards argued. And then another voice rose above it all, smooth, cutting and dripping with contempt. Such a fine display of British competence. All heads turned. Igor Karkaroff stepped from the shadows, his tall figure framed by two Durmstrang boys who looked pale and shaken. His smile was thin and cruel as he gestured at the ministry wizards. This is what passes for protection. Masked cowards march through the camps, muggles are tortured for sport, and you, he sneered, you chase children and house elves through the woods. Crouch's head snapped toward him, fury radiating from every line of his face. Watch yourself, Karkaroff. Oh, I am watching, Karkaroff replied silkily, his eyes glittering. I am watching very closely. And so is the world. Tell me, will the prophet print of your efficiency tomorrow, or of your shame? The tension in the clearing became unbearable, wands twitching in every hand. Arthur stepped forward quickly, putting himself between the two men. That's enough, he said firmly, voice low but sharp. We are all rattled, but this is not the place. People are frightened. Children are frightened. Put your energy into finding the true culprits, not tearing each other apart. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, as the skull above began to fade, the ministry wizards lowered their wands. Muttered orders spread. Families were herded back toward the campsite, eyes wide and faces drained of colour. By the time Harry and the others reached the Weasley tent again, the world felt muted. The green glow had dimmed from the sky, but its echo lingered in every corner, as though it had burned itself into memory. Inside, Molly rushed to them, gathering Ginny into her arms. She touched Fred and George's faces, as if to reassure herself they were still real, still here. Ron dropped onto a cot without a word, his usual bluster gone. The tent was quiet. No jokes, no teasing. Only the muffled sounds of distant shouts still carrying from the woods. Arthur crouched in the centre, rubbing his face with both hands before looking up at them. You're safe, that's what matters. His voice was tired, older somehow. But tonight is a reminder. Voldemort's followers may hide in masks, but they are not gone. Not truly. Silence followed. Ginny sniffled quietly. Hermione sat rigid, still visibly furious at what had been done to Winky. Fred and George exchanged grim looks, their wands still clutched in their fists. Harry lay back on his cot, staring at the ceiling. His scar still tingled faintly, though no one else could feel it. Above the canvas roof, he imagined the serpent-tongued skull still grinning in the sky. The World Cup was over. The celebration was dead. What lingered now was fear. The shadow of the dark mark lingered long after it had faded from the sky. Even days later, the memory of green light still haunted Harry's thoughts, flickering in his dreams. September came quickly. The trunk-pack scramble at King's Cross Station felt almost surreal, as if the everyday bustle of muggles could erase the image of silver masks and screaming voices. It didn't. Harry could still feel the tingle of the scar on his forehead as they passed through the barrier and the scarlet steam engine came into view. The Hogwarts Express hissed and roared with familiar warmth, but the atmosphere on the platform was taut. Auras in dark cloaks lingered near the edges, their sharp eyes scanning the crowd. The ministry was everywhere now, visible in ways it had never been before. Parents hugged their children longer than usual, whispered warnings as if the train ride itself were a risk. After settling in, Harry slipped away from the compartment to stretch his legs, when he nearly collided with someone turning the corner. Books clattered to the floor, and Harry dropped to help gather them. "Sorry, I wasn't looking," he started, then froze when he looked up. It was Cho. Her black hair fell in a neat curtain around her face, her expression softening the moment she realised who she'd bumped into. "Harry," she said gently, almost with relief. I was hoping I'd see you. Harry's ears went hot, though he wasn't sure why. Oh, yeah, hi. He handed her the last book, which turned out to be a charms text. She accepted it with a smile, then hesitated. How are you doing? After the other night. Her voice lowered on the words, as if she didn't want them overheard. I saw you in the clearing. You looked... She stopped herself, searching for the right word. You looked like it hit you harder than most. Harry blinked, caught off guard. I guess it did. He wanted to say more, that his scar had tingled, that the sight of the mark had felt personal somehow, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he shrugged. I've just never seen anything like that before. Cho's gaze was steady, not pitying but understanding. No one should have to. Harry found himself smiling faintly. Thanks. Cho shifted her books in her arms. I should get back to my compartment before it fills up. But, Harry, if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me. She offered him one last small smile before slipping past Cedric, her robes brushing lightly against Harry's arm. Harry stood for a moment longer, watching her go, his stomach doing that odd lurch again. Cedric chuckled softly beside him, clapping him lightly on the shoulder before heading after her. When Harry finally returned to his compartment, Ron immediately raised an eyebrow. Where'd you vanish off to? No one. I mean, nowhere, Harry said quickly, sliding the door shut behind him. But he couldn't quite hide the faint smile tugging at his mouth. The train rattled along the countryside, steam hissing as the rolling fields blurred past the window. Ron had been quiet for a long while, staring at the passing scenery, but eventually he let out a sharp huff. That aura last night, he said suddenly. The one who nearly blasted the lot of us. He could have killed someone. Didn't even look before he fired. If Dad hadn't stepped in... He shook his head, jaw tight. They're supposed to protect us, not nearly hex kids to pieces. Hermione, sitting opposite, looked just as pale as she had in the clearing. Her voice was low but firm. It wasn't just the auras, Ron. Did you see Crouch? He was out of his mind, screaming at Winky, desperate to blame someone. That wasn't justice. That was paranoia, and it's dangerous. She clenched her hands in her lap. That's what terrifies me. Not just masked Death Eaters, but the people in charge of protecting us snapping under pressure. Harry leaned against the window, watching the fields roll by, and nodded slowly. He hadn't stopped thinking about the mark blazing above them, about how it seemed to burn in his eyes. He didn't have words for that, not yet, but he agreed with both of them. It was chaos, he muttered. No one knew what they were doing. Ron let out a dark laugh. Too right. They'd all lose their heads in a Quidditch match. Hermione didn't smile. This isn't Quidditch, Ron. People could have died. Ron's grin faltered, and for once he didn't argue. The compartment fell quiet again, only the clatter of the train filling the space. But the silence wasn't comfortable. It was heavy, the kind that pressed down and lingered. Harry glanced between his friends and realised they weren't just nervous. They were angry, and so was he. The train whistle shrieked as the Hogwarts Express slowed into Hogsmeade Station. Students spilled out into the cool September air, voices buzzing with half-whispered rumours of the World Cup. Lanterns flickered along the platform, their glow soft against the night. Harry, Ron and Hermione shouldered their trunks with the rest of the Weasleys, their boots crunching over gravel as they followed the herd of students up to the carriages. It felt almost normal. The rolling path toward the castle, the glow of Hogwarts rising against the sky. But the mood was different this year. Groups of students huddled in closer circles, whispers darting about the dark mark, about auras, about safety. The laughter of first years had an edge to it, high and nervous. By the time the students streamed into the Great Hall, the castle seemed to pulse with the chatter of fear and speculation. Candles floated overhead, brighter than usual, as though the staff were trying to banish the gloom by sheer will. The Sorting Hat had barely finished its last song when the clapping faded and Dumbledore rose. The candles overhead seemed to lean into the silence, their flames steady in the hush. His eyes swept the hall, grave but not unkind.
"My dear students," he began, his voice carrying with calm strength, "it is always a joy to welcome you home to Hogwarts. Yet I cannot pretend that this year begins as others have. You have all heard whispers of the Quidditch World Cup. Many of you saw it firsthand. A night meant for celebration turned to fear. Families scattered, laughter was silenced, and a symbol many of us hoped never to see again returned to the sky. A murmur rippled through the hall, even the Slytherins shifted uneasily. Dumbledore raised a hand. But we must remember, fear is the true weapon of those who would see us divided. Fear breeds suspicion, anger and hatred, and though fear is powerful, it is not invincible. Unity, courage and compassion are stronger still." He paused. Students leaned forward, drawn in. Harry felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly just hearing him. But then, beside Dumbledore, Cornelius Fudge lurched to his feet. His bowler hat bobbed as he forced a smile that looked painted on. "Yes, yes, very stirring, Albus," Fudge declared. "But let us not trouble these fine young minds with such dire thoughts. The truth of the matter is this. While unfortunate, the situation was handled swiftly by my ministry. Swiftly and decisively. Order restored in record time." He puffed his chest. "The culprits dispersed, safety ensured. That is what matters." Harry, Ron and Hermione gaped. Hermione mouthed, "Record time." Ron muttered darkly, "More like record stupidity." Fred suddenly cupped his hands and shouted across the Gryffindor table, "Oi, Minister! Did your shining knights catch anyone, or were they too busy hexing teenagers?" A ripple of laughter burst across the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw tables. A few Hufflepuffs clapped the table in agreement. Fudge flushed crimson. He tugged at his collar, pretending he hadn't heard. "Yes, well, swift justice does not always mean immediate arrests. The important thing is the swift action of my auras prevented further harm." "Further harm?" George echoed loudly, leaning over the table. "Funny, my brother nearly got fried by one of your swift actions." The laughter grew louder. Even a few Slytherins smirked at the minister's discomfort. McGonagall's lips pressed into a thin line, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of amusement before she snapped, "Weasleys, enough!" Dumbledore's gaze stayed on Fudge, calm but edged with iron. "What the minister means," he said smoothly, "is that vigilance remains necessary, and that none of us are untouched by the shadows of the past. Hogwarts will do all in its power to remain a place of safety and of learning, but we do not dismiss fear by pretending it does not exist. We face it together, with open eyes." The hall quieted again. This time even Fudge said nothing. He sank back into his chair, fiddling with his hat brim as if to disappear behind it. Dumbledore let the last of his words settle before continuing, his voice warm but steady. "Now, before we turn to our feast, I have news to share that will shape this year in ways none of you have yet imagined. For centuries, 3 renowned schools of magic came together in the spirit of unity, courage, and challenge. Tonight, I am proud to tell you that this year Hogwarts will once again host the Triwizard Tournament." A swell of gasps and excited chatter rippled through the hall. Ron nearly dropped his goblet, his eyes wide. Fred and George leaned forward, grinning like wolves scenting prey. Even the Slytherins sat straighter, their faces sharpening with ambition. 3 champions, Dumbledore continued, one from each school, shall be chosen by an impartial judge to face a series of magical tasks. Dangerous tasks. They are not for the faint of heart nor for the careless.
These tasks will test courage, intelligence, and resourcefulness in ways no classroom could prepare you for. And so, only students of age will be permitted to compete. Groans erupted from half the hall. Fred shouted, "That's discrimination, that is," and was promptly cuffed by George, though he was grinning just as hard. Before the laughter could spread, Fudge leapt to his feet again, tugging at his bowler hat as if this were his cue. "Yes, yes, very thrilling, very historic," he said, puffing his chest. "And may I just add, what a triumph it is for my administration to bring such a grand event back to British soil. The ministry has worked tirelessly with foreign officials to make this happen. The safeguards are extraordinary, I assure you. Not a single hair on any student's head will be out of place. Swift precautions, swift order, swift nonsense," George muttered into his pumpkin juice. Harry and Ron stared at the minister, dumbstruck. Hermione rolled her eyes so hard Harry thought she might hurt herself. Dumbledore cleared his throat politely, his eyes twinkling just enough to undercut the minister's bluster. "Thank you, Cornelius. Indeed, our foreign guests will be joining us soon." The great doors of the hall swung wide. A hush fell as a line of students glided in, their silk uniforms shimmering like pale water under the candlelight. At their head, tall and graceful, was Fleur Delacour. Even the way she walked seemed to dazzle the air. Whispers rushed through the Gryffindor table. Ron nearly choked on his bread roll. "Blimey!" Hermione folded her arms, unimpressed. "Honestly, she hasn't even said anything yet." Fred leaned forward dramatically. "If she says one word, Ron will fall straight off his bench." "Shut up," Ron muttered, ears pink. Fleur and her fellow Beauxbatons students took their seats, their movements precise, elegant, almost rehearsed. The hall buzzed, caught between awe and envy. Then the doors boomed again, and this time a colder draft swept in. Durmstrang students marched in with heavy boots and dark furs, their presence immediately heavier, more imposing. At their head was Igor Karkaroff, sweeping like a general before his soldiers, and just behind him, Victor Krum. A low murmur passed through the hall. Ron went rigid, eyes wide with admiration. "It's him. It's actually him," he whispered, gripping Harry's arm hard enough to bruise. Krum barely glanced at the students as he passed. His gaze flickered across the hall once, and in that glance it lingered, just for a heartbeat, on the Gryffindor table. Hermione felt it and shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Harry noticed the double-take, and something sharp twisted in his stomach. The Durmstrang students seated themselves with less grace than Beauxbatons, but with a quiet discipline that felt just as deliberate. Their fur cloaks shed bits of snow onto the benches, and their boots clunked as they sat. Dumbledore raised his hands once more, his voice calm over the hum of whispers. 3 schools, 3 champions, 1 cup. Let this year remind us that though shadows may return, light endures where we stand together. Let us welcome our guests warmly and treat them not as rivals, but as fellow students of magic. Applause broke across the hall, though uneven, Gryffindor's loud and enthusiastic, Slytherin's cool and clipped, Ravenclaw's curious, and Hufflepuff's roaring proudly with Cedric at their table. At the staff table, Fudge clapped too, his smile too wide, as though he alone had delivered this historic moment. At dinner, Beauxbatons clustered together at first, their pale blue silk uniforms gleaming under the floating candles, speaking softly in French. Durmstrang sat in disciplined rows, eating heartily, but rarely speaking outside their group, their fur cloaks draped over the backs of benches like pelts. Every time Fleur laughed, a light, musical sound, heads turned. Ron nearly dropped his fork into his mashed potatoes, staring dreamily until Hermione thumped him with her elbow. But it wasn't just Ron. A line of 5th and 6th year boys from both Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff accidentally refilled their goblets near her table, each lingering just long enough for Fleur to smile politely before returning to her plate. Fred, however, seemed more amused than dazed. He leaned across George with a grin. "She's got half the hall tripping over themselves." "Give it a week. I'll have her laughing at one of my jokes." George scoffed, but Harry noticed Fleur glance their way once or twice. the corner of her mouth twitching in amusement at the chaos her mere presence stirred. As classes began the next day, the castle corridors, already tight with hundreds of students, now felt like crowded marketplaces. Durmstrang students strode about with heavy boots that echoed against stone, often brushing past smaller second years without apology. Beauxbatons moved like a flowing current, elegant but aloof, their accents lilting as they asked for directions to classrooms. Harry and Ron rounded a corner one afternoon, only to skid to a halt as Fleur herself was standing there with a parchment map. "Excuse me," she said in accented English. "The library, where is it?" Ron's ears went red as he stammered something incomprehensible, nearly pointing her toward a broom cupboard. Fleur tilted her head, patient but bemused, until Harry stepped in and pointed down the corridor. "Left at the next staircase, then 2 floors up." "Merci." Fleur gave them both a smile that made Ron sway slightly on the spot. As she glided off, Ron muttered, I'd read every book in the library if it meant she'd ask me again." Harry rolled his eyes but couldn't help laughing. They walked onward to the lawns near the lake. Groups from all 3 schools began to mingle in forced but slowly warming conversations. Durmstrang students showed off wandless sparks of fire that impressed some Gryffindors. Beauxbatons girls laughed behind their hands at Seamus Finnegan's disastrous attempt to flirt in broken French. Near the water's edge, Harry spotted Cedric speaking earnestly with a pair of Beauxbatons boys about wandwork, his natural charm bridging the gap. Cedric caught Harry's eye and waved him over, the gesture easy, brotherly. Harry joined them hesitantly, only to find Cho already there, nodding along to Cedric's explanation. She flashed Harry a small smile, and just like that, the awkwardness melted. It wasn't perfect. The air was still thick with rivalry and pride. But Hogwarts felt less like a fortress and more like a crossroads. The first class to take place this year was Defense Against the Dark Arts. The room fell silent as the man clunked to the front. His wooden leg struck the stone floor with a rhythmic thunk, 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 each step louder than the last. His face was a battlefield of scars, his grizzled hair sticking up as though it had been scorched. The magical eye in his head whirred and spun, darting from one student to another like it could peel the skin off their thoughts. He stopped at the desk, slammed his gnarled staff down once and growled, "Name's Moody. Alastair Moody. Some of you have heard of me. Most of you haven't. Either way, I don't care. All you need to know is this. I'm here to make sure you don't end up as corpses before your 7th year." A nervous giggle escaped from the back row. The magical eye snapped in that direction and whirled menacingly until the boy shrank down behind his desk. Moody barked a laugh that was as humorless as it was frightening. "Good instinct, boy. Ducking down might buy you an extra 2 seconds of life. Sometimes that's all you get." A ripple of unease ran through the class. "Now," he continued, pacing across the front with his uneven gait, "you've been taught plenty of fluff in this subject. A few useful lessons, aye." His normal eye softened for half a second, as if conceding Lupin had been worth something. But not enough. Not nearly. Dark wizards won't give you time to recite a definition. They won't pause while you look up counter-curses. They'll curse you, hex you, burn your house down, and laugh while you choke on the smoke. He stopped suddenly, stabbing his staff toward a cluster of Gryffindors. "Anyone here want to be laughed at by a Death Eater?" No one answered. Moody's mouth twisted into something that might have been a grin. "Didn't think so." He leaned on his staff, his mismatched eyes roaming the room. "So, what are we going to do about it?" "I'll tell you. We're going to train. Hard. Harder than you've ever been trained. You'll learn to duel on your feet, with your wand up and your brain still working. You'll learn that panic is the same as death, and that thinking fast is the only way to live." The magical eye rolled and landed on Harry, lingering for a fraction longer than it should have. Harry shifted uncomfortably, but didn't look away. Moody smirked. "Good. The Potter boy's got some steel in him. But steel bends if you hammer it too long, eh? We'll see."
A chill ran down Harry's spine, though he couldn't say why. Moody clapped his hands together, the sound sharp as a crack of thunder. "I'll give you this warning. You'll leave my lessons bruised. You'll leave them humiliated. You'll leave them wishing you were in History of Magic, listening to that ghost drone on about goblin rebellions. But you'll also leave them alive. And if you remember what I teach you here, maybe, just maybe, you'll still be alive 5 years from now when the world outside these walls comes knocking." He let the silence stretch, the weight of his words pressing down on the class. Then his lips curled again, this time with a glimmer of dark humour. "Now don't all thank me at once. Compliments make me nervous, makes me think you're about to hex me in the back." A few scattered laughs broke the tension, though uneasily. Moody slammed his staff one last time. "One's out! This isn't a knitting club. We're starting with stance. Anyone faints, I'll chalk it up as a learning experience." The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispers and sideways glances. Students lingered at the edges of classrooms, speculating in low voices about the tournament, about Durmstrang's heavy boots echoing down the corridors, about Beauxbatons gliding like silk banners through the castle. At supper, Fleur caused another ripple by asking McGonagall a question in perfectly precise English, her accent lilting like music. The boys nearest to her nearly dropped their forks. By the time Gryffindor House wound its way back up to the tower, the chatter had shifted from nervous to excitable. The great announcement had replaced fear with curiosity. The shadow of the dark mark was still there, but now it loomed behind them, while the tournament loomed ahead. Harry, Ron, Seamus, Dean and Neville sprawled across their beds, the atmosphere buzzing with the kind of energy only the first night back could bring. Trunks were half open, robes strewn about, chocolate frog wrappers littering the floor. Seamus flopped backward, hands behind his head. "I'm telling you, the Durmstrang lot could break you in half just by looking at you. Did you see those shoulders? They don't drink pumpkin juice over there, they drink dragon blood." Neville looked alarmed. "They don't really, do they?" Dean snorted. "Course not, Nev." But Seamus might if someone dared him. "Too right," Seamus said proudly. "Better than fainting at the sight of Crumb." "I did not faint," Ron shot back, sitting upright. "I just wasn't expecting him to walk into the Great Hall like he owned the place." "He's my favourite player. You can't just prepare for that." Dean grinned. "So what you're saying is, if you meet him in the corridor, you'll need smelling salts." "Shut it," Ron muttered, ears pink. Harry chuckled quietly from his bed. He'd never seen Ron so flustered. But the laughter turned quickly when Seamus added, "What about those Beauxbaton girls, though? Merlin's beard, eye and half the Ravenclaws nearly fell off their benches." Ron flopped back dramatically. "Don't even start. Did you see the blonde one? The way she—" He broke off, staring dreamily at the ceiling. "That's Fleur," Neville piped up shyly. "I heard she's part Vila." "Explains everything," Seamus said, smirking. "Poor Ron, bewitched by her he is." Ron sat up indignantly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Dean raised an eyebrow. "Means, if she asked you to bark like a dog, you'd do it." The room erupted with laughter. Even Harry couldn't help it. Ron, bright red, grabbed a pillow and hurled it at Seamus, who caught it and swung it back. For a moment, the tension of the last weeks evaporated in feathers and laughter. As the noise settled, Harry leaned back against his headboard, smiling faintly. He thought of Fleur dazzling the hall, of Crumb's heavy scowl, of Cho's quick grin in the corridor. Hogwarts was going to feel very different this year. The dormitory settled into silence. Ron's snores came first, then Neville's steady breathing, and eventually even Seamus and Dean quieted after one last round of muffled jokes. Harry, however, lay awake longer, staring at the crimson canopy above him. His mind wouldn't still. He kept seeing Moody's whirling eye, feeling it bore into him, like it knew things he didn't. At last, his thoughts blurred into dreams.
He stood in a hall of mirrors. His reflection multiplied endlessly, but each Harry was slightly different. One grinning nervously, another scowling, another bruised and bleeding. They moved out of sync, whispering words he couldn't catch. On the far end of the hall sat the Triwizard Cup. Its silver gleam pulsed like a heartbeat, filling the mirrors with light that fractured and refracted until the whole space shimmered. Harry took a step toward it, and the reflections shifted. Cho appeared in the glass beside him, smiling, her eyes kind. Then Hermione was there too, her reflection looking past him, distracted, almost fading. Between them the glass cracked, the fracture splitting their images apart. Harry reached for the crack to hold it together, only to feel the mirror ice cold biting into his fingertips. A shadow stirred behind the cup. It lengthened, stretching across the mirrored floor, black as ink. The cup flickered, the light guttering, until the shadow swallowed it whole. Then came the voice, low, mocking, familiar. Steel bends if you hammer it too long. Harry spun, but the mirrors showed nothing now. No Cho, no Hermione, no cup. Only the skull and serpent of the dark mark, burning green across every surface, the light crawling over his skin just as it had in the clearing. His scar seared. He stumbled back, tripping over shards of broken glass that hadn't been there a moment ago. They cut into his palms, and when he lifted his hands, the blood wasn't red, but green, glowing, dripping like venom. The laughter rose around him, echoing through the glass, through the cracks, through his skull. Harry jerked awake, chest heaving. The dormitory was quiet again, the fire in the hearth only embers. His scar prickled faintly. Ron muttered something in his sleep and rolled over. Harry pressed a hand to his forehead, his scar throbbing, and laid back down, but sleep didn't come easily. The image of the cup swallowed in shadow lingered, cold and heavy, as if it were waiting for him beyond the walls of the castle. The first rays of dawn crept through the tall windows, painting the dormitory in streaks of gold. Harry rolled over, blinking away the fragments of the dream that still clung to him. Around him, the other boys stirred in their own unique rhythms. Seamus was already halfway dressed, humming to himself while his wand flicked his tie into a perfect knot. Dean muttered a sleepy spell that sent his books stacking neatly into his bag, though one quill kept darting rebelliously under the bed. Neville fumbled with his robes, dropping his wand twice before finally casting a charm that straightened the fabric for him, looking both relieved and sheepish. Ron, of course, was sprawled on his bed, groaning into his pillow. 5 more minutes, he mumbled. Hermione wasn't even here, but Harry could almost hear her voice in his head. You'll be late, Ronald. Harry and Neville left the tower together, their footsteps echoing in the cool stone corridors. Neville still looked half asleep, clutching his bag like a lifeline. First herbology class today, Neville said through a yawn. Hope Sprout goes easy on us to start. Not likely, Harry replied, grinning. She'll probably have you repotting something that bites. Neville brightened a little. Wouldn't mind. Better than standing around with Moody glaring holes through me. He mimicked Moody's whirling eye and Harry laughed. The Great Hall was livelier than usual for a first morning. The long tables buzzed not only with Hogwarts chatter, but with new voices, accents weaving into the air like threads of colour. The floating candles seemed brighter, almost as if the castle itself wanted to put on its best face for its guests. Harry, Neville and Ginny sat together, filling plates with toast and eggs. Around them, the atmosphere was a collage of mingling cultures. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy leaned across to a cluster of Durmstrang lads, laughing loudly as one of them conjured sparks into the shape of a snarling wolf that prowled along the tabletop. Crabbe and Goyle barked their crude laughs, but even some of the Ravenclaws glanced over, impressed despite themselves. Draco's voice carried just enough to be heard across the hall. "Now that's proper magic. None of this baby work Flitwick calls a class." The Durmstrang boys snickered, clearly enjoying the bravado. At the Ravenclaw table, a trio of girls giggled with 2 Beauxbatons students, practicing charms with elegant wand flicks. A small bouquet of violets bloomed on the table, which the Ravenclaw girls clapped at delightedly. The Beauxbaton girls smiled, poised and graceful, while Flitwick, passing by, nearly tripped over himself in excitement at the delicate wandwork. Closer to Harry, Cedric strolled past the Gryffindor table with a few Hufflepuff friends in tow. His easy smile earned him nods from both Beauxbaton and Durmstrang students alike. When he saw Harry, he paused, offering a clap on the shoulder. "Big year ahead," Cedric said warmly. "Good luck with classes, mate." "Something tells me they won't be easy." Harry smiled back, feeling the reassurance in Cedric's tone. "Thanks. You too, Neville," straightened in his seat, clearly pleased Cedric had noticed them at all. Ginny smirked, elbowing Harry gently. "Our Hogwarts golden boy looking out for the other golden boy. You two are going to be a great couple," Harry chuckled, shaking his head, but he couldn't help noticing how Cedric's presence seemed to settle the hall, uniting instead of dividing. Still, beneath the laughter and magical displays, the undercurrent was clear. Rivalries were already forming, friendships teetering on the edge of alliances. Hogwarts had become a stage, and every student knew the curtain was about to rise. The greenhouse doors creaked open, releasing a wave of humid, fragrant air. Professor Sprout waved the class inside, her patched hat bobbing as she carried a tray of strange, bulbous plants. "These beauties," she said cheerfully, "are scent shrouds. Rare, useful, and often underestimated." She tapped one, and it released a puff of sweet, heady fragrance that made several students sway on their feet. "Careful now! Too much exposure and you'll be dizzy for hours." The scent shroud's oils, when extracted correctly, can confuse or dull the senses of magical creatures. Some beasts find it overwhelming. Their eyesight blurs, their hearing dampens. But used wrong, she wrinkled her nose, you'll be the one stumbling about. Neville scribbled furiously, his quill scratching the parchment. He leaned in, eyes wide with admiration, as Sprout demonstrated how to harvest a single shimmering droplet without bursting the bulb. Harry, meanwhile, did the bare minimum of note-taking, content to watch Neville beam with confidence. It was clear who the star pupil was in this lesson. The next class was potions. The dungeon was colder than usual, the flicker of torchlight casting long shadows over rows of cauldrons. Students shuffled into their seats, quills at the ready. The air already carried the bitter tang of dried herbs and something metallic, as though the room itself remembered 1,000 failed brews. Snape swept to the front, robes billowing dramatically, and let the silence stretch until even the whispers died away. "This year," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "will not be wasted on babbling about theories you will promptly forget, or copying notes you will never read. Number. This year, you will brew. You will stir. You will scorch your eyebrows off if you cannot follow instructions." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the class. Snape's lip curled. "Do not mistake me. I will not mourn your eyebrows. I will, however, take points if you waste my ingredients, and if your incompetence results in the death of your partner." He paused, eyes sweeping over Seamus. "I suppose we shall all benefit from a valuable lesson in natural selection." Even Malfoy snorted at that, though he tried to cover it with a cough. Snape folded his arms, his expression razor sharp. "This term will focus on practical application, potions of focus, endurance, and control. Brews that matter beyond this classroom, though I doubt many of you will rise to the challenge. Still, miracles do happen." His gaze landed briefly on Harry. "Rarely." Harry clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to respond. Snape continued. Today we begin with the focus draft, useful for sharpening reflexes, though I imagine in this room it will mostly reveal how little focus you possess to begin with. Quills scratched frantically as he listed the ingredients on the board with a flick of his wand. Begin. Try not to kill anyone. Or do, if you feel strongly about it. I'm not picky about volunteers for expulsion. The class erupted into motion, knives clinking, flames sparking to life beneath cauldrons. The scent of valerian root and moonstone soon thickened the air. The final class of the day was Transfiguration. In the bright classroom, Professor McGonagall stood tall at the front, her expression sharp, but her eyes alight with challenge. This term, she announced crisply, we begin Conjuration, a difficult branch of Transfiguration, but a useful one. Magic that creates, not merely alters. She flicked her wand and a rope uncoiled from thin air, snaking neatly onto the floor. With another flick, it vanished. Harry tried, but only managed a frayed cord that disintegrated in his hands. Ron conjured what looked suspiciously like a garden snake before it fizzled away. Hermione, of course, produced a flawless rope that coiled obediently at her feet. McGonagall paused by Harry's desk. "Control, Potter," she said, not unkindly. "Not force. Power without restraint will betray you." Harry nodded, determined to try again. Something about her words stuck with him, more than usual. By the time classes ended, Harry's mind was stuffed with half-formed spells and lingering scents of plants and potions. He was in dire need of a break, and luckily, the twins had something in mind. The goblet of fire blazed in the centre of the great hall, its blue-white flames licking upward, casting ghostly light on the enchanted ceiling. Students packed in around the age line Dumbledore had drawn, a shimmering golden circle that sparkled faintly, daring anyone foolish enough to cross. Fred and George Weasley stood at the front of the crowd, puffed up like actors before a premiere. Fred cleared his throat loudly, raising his arms. "Ladies, gentlemen, and Slytherins," he announced with a flourish. "Prepare yourselves for a feat of daring, genius, and unmatched handsomeness." George bowed deeply. "Yes, dear brother, tonight we break through the cruel shackles of age discrimination. Tonight we spit in the eye of bureaucracy. And tonight," Fred added, waggling his eyebrows, "one of us shall be Hogwarts champion. The other, naturally, will manage the fan club." Laughter rippled through the gathered students. Even some of the Durmstrang boys smirked at the twins' bravado. Hermione folded her arms. "This is ridiculous. Dumbledore enchanted that line with advanced age magic. There's no way they'll manage it."
"Behold," Fred cried, "aging potion, brewed by yours truly, aged to perfection and guaranteed to make us older, wiser, and devastatingly attractive to the judges." George clinked his own vial against Fred's. "Bottoms up." They downed the potion in unison, their faces twisting at the taste. Then, with dramatic confidence, they strode toward the golden circle. The hall held its breath. Fred crossed first, grinning, and for a heartbeat it looked like it had worked. George followed, both of them stepping proudly up to the goblet. They dropped their names in with a flourish, and for 2 glorious seconds, nothing happened. Then the goblet roared. Blue flames shot upward, sparks exploding like fireworks, and the twins were flung backward with a force that sent them tumbling head over heels across the floor. They landed in a heap, hair singed and beards sprouting on their chins, long, silver, and identical. The hall erupted with laughter. "Merlin's beard!" Seamus howled. "Or should I say Merlin's beards?" Fred sat up, tugging at the long silver strands that now brushed his chest. "Oh, I'm distinguished," he croaked. George, stroking his own beard thoughtfully, sighed. "I look like a homeless Dumbledore." Even Hermione was laughing now, though she tried to cover it with her hand. "I told you," she managed between giggles. Fred and George attempted to stand with dignity, but their tangled beards had knotted together. They tugged in opposite directions before collapsing again,
sending the hall into another round of shrieking laughter. "Don't you dare laugh, Granger," Fred wheezed. "We were this close. Closer than you'll ever be," a Slytherin boy jeered. But even he couldn't keep a straight face. The laughter in the hall was still rolling when the tall figure of Albus Dumbledore appeared at the far end. He walked with his usual calm stride, though his eyes gleamed with unmistakable mischief as they landed on the Weasley twins, beards still flowing magnificently down their chests. Dumbledore paused just before them, long fingers steepled together, surveying the scene as though it were a particularly curious painting. My, he said at last, his voice light but carrying across the hall. Either Hogwarts has been visited by two very young and enthusiastic Father Christmases, or two of my students have attempted to outwit an enchantment woven by some of the greatest magical minds in history. He tilted his head, beard twitching in amusement. If it is the former, I must ask you not to return until December. If it is the latter, I congratulate you both for succeeding in growing older without wisdom. The hall erupted again, louder than before. Fred, stroking his beard with as much dignity as he could muster, said solemnly, "Professor, we merely wish to test the fairness of the system." "Indeed?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "And what conclusion have you reached?" George leaned in, tugging their beards apart unsuccessfully. "That it is very fair, sir. Very thorough." "Excellent," Dumbledore replied, nodding gravely. More laughter rippled through the students, a few Beauxbaton girls covering their mouths as they giggled. Even some of the Draco was sheepishly laughing with his fellow Slytherins. Dumbledore waved his wand once, and the twins' silver beards vanished with a soft pop. Their singed hair remained, however, to the delight of the crowd. "Now," Dumbledore added gently, though his voice carried a hidden sternness, "let us not forget the goblet is not a toy. It is a magical contract, and once it is chosen, there is no turning back. Tampering with it is unwise. But I do appreciate your daring ambitions." His eyes twinkled, but the underlying warning was clear. Fred and George muttered something that sounded like "worth a try" as they slunk back to the Gryffindor table, greeted with cheers and jeers alike. The next day dawned grey and cool, with a mist clinging to the lawns outside the castle. By the time classes ended, Harry and Hermione had settled into the library, parchment and books spread out across the table between them. The quiet hum of other students studying blended with the occasional scratch of quills. Harry leaned back in his chair, stretching. "I still don't think I'll ever get the hang of McGonagall's conjuration spells." My rope came out looking like a snake that died mid-shed. Hermione snorted softly, adjusting the stack of notes at her elbow. "It's not about force, Harry. It's about precision. You just rush everything. McGonagall said control matters more than power. You should practice when you've got time." "Right," Harry said, rolling his eyes playfully, "because my free time is endless." The sound of heavy boots echoed between the shelves. Victor Crumb appeared at the end of their row, shoulders hunched, expression as stony as ever. His presence drew a few stares from nearby students, though he seemed not to notice. He stopped by their table, his dark eyes landing squarely on Hermione. "You. I've seen you in the library. Do you know it well?" His voice was thick with his accent, his words deliberate. Hermione blinked, startled. "Yes, of course. Why?" "I need books for my magical care creatures class." "Is hard to find," Hermione, clearly flustered, pushed back her chair and gestured vaguely toward the stacks. "Oh, yes, they're in section C near the back. I can show you if you'd like." Crumb gave a short nod. "Thank you." His gaze lingered on her for a moment before he turned away, boots thudding softly as he moved toward the shelves. Hermione sat back down, cheeks slightly pink, quill poised but unmoving. Harry said nothing. He stared at his transfiguration notes, trying to figure out why he was struggling with conjuration so much. I'll just finish this," Hermione muttered, more to herself than him. though her eyes kept darting in the direction Crumb had gone. Harry shoved his books into his bag. "Forgot some supplies in the dorm," he muttered, standing. "I'll be back later." Hermione only nodded, her eyes flickering once more toward the aisle where Crumb had disappeared. Corridors bustled with students, voices bouncing off the stone walls as Harry made his way back toward Gryffindor Tower. He rounded a corner just as Cho stepped out of a classroom with 2 of her Ravenclaw friends, her satchel swinging at her side. "Hi, Harry," she said brightly, giving him the kind of smile that made his stomach lurch. Harry nearly dropped the book he was carrying. "Oh, hey, Cho." He scrambled for something to say, then blurted, "How are classes treating you so far?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Busy. Flitwick's already piling us with charm work, but I don't mind. Keeps me distracted." Her eyes lit with curiosity. "What about you? Surviving McGonagall's conjuration?" Harry laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Barely. I think my rope was alive for a second before it fell apart. McGonagall wasn't impressed." Cho giggled softly, shaking her head. "You'll get it. You always do." They walked side by side toward the courtyard, the chatter around them fading slightly as Harry tried not to overthink every step. "What do you think about the tournament?" she asked after a moment. Harry shrugged. "Exciting, I guess. Feels like half the castle is talking about nothing else." Cho nodded, her dark eyes gleaming. "It's strange, isn't it? Hogwarts feels different with all the visitors here, like we're part of something bigger." Harry opened his mouth to agree, but just as they stepped into the courtyard, Fred and George waved him over with exaggerated gestures, Ron and Cedric already standing with them. "Oi, Harry!" Fred called. "Stop flirting and come talk strategy." Harry felt his ears burn. "I should, go see what they want." Cho smiled kindly. "Go on. I'll see you later." As Harry turned toward the group, he glanced back once. Cho was already laughing at something one of her Ravenclaw friends had said, her shoulders shaking, her smile wide. Harry gave a little shrug, pushed the thought aside and made his way across the courtyard to where Fred, George, Ron and Cedric were waiting, their energy a familiar anchor. Fred and George were already holding court near the fountain, arms crossed, faces lit with mischief as Harry approached. Ron stood beside them, practically bouncing on his heels, while Cedric leaned casually against the stone wall, sunlight catching the edge of his Hufflepuff badge. "Harry, my boy!" George declared the moment he arrived. "We were just discussing the injustice of life." Fred nodded solemnly. "Yes, that some of us were cruelly denied entry to eternal glory because of our tragically young faces." "Tragic indeed," George said. "And the fact that the goblet has no appreciation for charm or wit." Ron snorted. "It's probably grateful it doesn't have to deal with you lot embarrassing Hogwarts on an international stage." "Embarrassing?" Fred clutched his chest in mock offence. "Ronald, I'll have you know, we'd have had the judges eating out of our hands and singing our praises by the final task, which would, naturally, have been completed in record time." Harry rolled his eyes, but he was grinning. "Right. Until you blew yourselves up trying to impress them." Cedric chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Don't listen to them too much, Harry. Half of what they say is exaggeration." "Half?" George gasped. "That's generous." Ron leaned forward, eagerly. "So, Cedric, are you going to enter? You'd be brilliant at it." There was a pause. Cedric's smile turned a little more self-conscious. He pushed off the wall, folding his arms. "Actually, I already did." For a heartbeat, the group stared. Then Ron's face split into a grin. "You did? That's brilliant." Harry found himself nodding in agreement. "Yeah, it makes sense. If anyone's got a chance, it's you." Fred and George exchanged a glance, then simultaneously threw their arms around Cedric's shoulders. "Our champion," Fred declared. "The pride of Hogwarts," George chimed. Cedric laughed, shoving them off good-naturedly. "Don't start with titles yet. The goblet hasn't chosen anyone." Ron beamed, eyes shining with admiration. Still, you'd be the best. You'd do Hogwarts proud.
Harry caught Cedric's eye then, and for a moment there was no bravado, no show, just a warm, steady look that carried more than words. The kind of look an older brother might give, reassuring him without trying. Harry smiled back. The castle buzzed from the moment classes ended. Whispers raced through the corridors, excitement sparking off every group of students. Who would be chosen? Did Beauxbaton have a prodigy waiting to dazzle everyone? Would Crumb's reputation carry him straight into the tournament? By dinner, the great hall hummed like a hive. The goblet of fire still blazed at the centre, its white-blue flames licking skyward, casting shadows that danced across the enchanted ceiling. The air itself seemed charged, as if the castle knew what was about to unfold. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione, Cedric a few places down with the Hufflepuffs. Fred and George leaned forward eagerly across the table, whispering bets. "I've got 10 sickles on it being Crumb," Fred declared. 15 on Fleur, George countered. "Charm and talent, perfect package." "Both of you are hopeless," Hermione muttered. "It isn't about looks or reputation. The goblet will choose whoever's best qualified." Harry glanced toward Cedric, who caught his eye and gave him a steady smile. The great hall dimmed slightly, candles lowering as the goblet of fire's glow became the centerpiece. Its blue-white flames licked higher than ever, sparks drifting like fireflies. The atmosphere shifted from excited chatter to solemn anticipation. Dumbledore rose, but instead of speaking immediately, he gestured toward a sharp-featured man at the staff table. Barty Crouch Sr. stood, his robes immaculate, his expression severe. His presence alone seemed to hush the crowd. "Students," Crouch began, his clipped voice carrying through the hall. "Tonight begins the Tri-Wizard Tournament. A competition older than many kingdoms, revived with every precaution for safety. The Goblet of Fire is an impartial judge. It cannot be fooled by flattery, bribery, or fame." His eyes flicked briefly toward the twins, though his tone never wavered. "I will reiterate the rules once again. Each school shall have one champion chosen by the goblet. Each champion will be bound by magical contract to compete in 3 tasks that test magical ability, courage, and wit. This year, under the advisement of the Ministry and the heads of the 3 schools, we introduce an additional measure." Murmurs stirred as Crouch paused, his gaze sweeping across the students. "Champions may select a team of 6 supporters from their peers. These supporters will not face the tasks directly, but they may advise, strategize, and prepare their champion. They will be acknowledged as part of the official record, for the tournament is not only a test of individual talent, but of leadership, trust, and unity." A swell of excited whispers broke out. Crouch raised a hand. The hall stilled again. "Understand this. The goblet's choice is final. There is no appeal, no substitution, no resignation. To be chosen is to be bound. It is an honour and a burden, not to be taken lightly." He inclined his head stiffly toward Dumbledore. "Headmaster, the goblet is ready." The great hall fell into breathless silence as the goblet's flames leapt high, the blue-white fire casting ghostly shadows across the faces watching it. Sparks hissed and whirled. Then, with a burst, a slip of parchment shot into the air. Dumbledore caught it in one smooth motion, but the room leaned forward as though they could read the name from his eyes. "Fleur Delacour," he announced. The Beauxbaton table erupted, applause rolling like a wave. Fleur rose gracefully, though her face was pale with nerves. The goblet's light danced over her silver hair as she stepped forward, every movement precise, regal. Before the applause had faded, the flames flared again. The second parchment arced high, curling with heat. Dumbledore caught it, his expression impassive. "Victor Crumb." The Durmstrang table shook with cheers. Crumb stood, towering and unsmiling,
a man among students. His boots struck the floor with finality as he crossed to join Fleur, the goblet's glow reflecting off his stern face. The third name came swiftly. The goblet's flames pulsed, then spat another slip. Cedric Diggory. The Hogwarts exploded in thunderous pride, pounding the tables, chanting his name in unity. Cedric rose, cheeks flushed but smiling humbly, and strode forward. The applause followed him like a tide, filling the hall with a sense of rightness. 3 champions, balance restored, tradition upheld. Dumbledore lifted his hands, voice warm and assured. And there we have our champions. The goblet screamed. The fire roared higher than ever, shooting sparks like exploding stars. The flames twisted, turned blood red, and for a heartbeat, the entire hall was bathed in crimson light. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the goblet spat a final slip of parchment, its edges blackened and smoking. Dumbledore's hand snapped up to catch it. His eyes dropped to the name, then froze. For the first time all evening, his composure cracked. The hall noticed. His fingers tightened on the parchment, his mouth pressed thin, as though he wanted to question the words written there. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was no disguising the surprise. Harry Potter. The silence was crushing. It rolled through the great hall, heavier than any cheer. The name hung in the air like a curse. Harry sat frozen, his mind blank. 100 eyes bored into him. Confusion, outrage, suspicion. He hadn't. He knew he hadn't. Ron gaped at him. Hermione whispered, "No," barely audible. Dumbledore's piercing gaze sought him out, surprise still flickering at the edges of his expression. "Harry," he said quietly, though the words carried, "come forward." Harry's stomach twisted. His legs moved stiffly as if dragging him to judgment. He walked past the Gryffindor table, whispers snapping around him like whips. "He cheated! Too young! Impossible!" Up ahead, Fleur's face was unreadable. Crumb scowled openly, and Cedric looked more bewildered than anything else. The goblet still burned red behind them, its flames guttering strangely, as if something unclean lingered in its depths. The door slammed behind them, muting the roar of the hall outside. The room was long and lined with stone, its high ceiling glowing with floating lamps that trembled as though they too felt the tension. Harry's voice broke the silence before anyone else could speak. His words were fast, almost blurted, but steady. "I didn't put my name in the goblet." All eyes turned on him. Dumbledore's blue gaze locked on Harry's, piercing, searching. Then, with a decisive nod, he said, "I believe you." The relief was sharp but fleeting. The others erupted. "Believe him?" Karkaroff spat, his voice thick with disdain. "On nothing but his word. How very Gryffindor of you, Albus." He turned, sweeping his cloak. "Your star pupil is chosen, and you expect us to swallow the idea it's all an accident? A child forced into the oldest of magical contracts?" Fleur's cheeks flushed red, her accent sharpening with fury. "It is absurd. We study, we prepare, and then a boy too young, barely trained, he is picked. It dishonours the tournament." Fudge puffed, his bowler hat shaking as he gestured furiously. "It's out of the question. He is underage, and this entire thing will be a circus. The prophet will crucify us all. I warned against this revival, Albus. I warned you." "Minister," McGonagall snapped, her voice tight with restrained fury. "If you think Harry Potter would lie for attention, then you are either willfully blind or profoundly unfit to judge character."
The boy has done nothing but face dangers no child should ever face. And now you would accuse him of seeking fame. Accuse? Fudge retorted. The boy is famous enough already. Not by choice, McGonagall cut back, her voice shaking. Snape, who had been silent, stepped forward at last, the charred parchment in hand. His dark eyes scanned it with surgical precision. He spoke softly, but every syllable cut through the room. This parchment does not read like the others. He held it up for the light. The magic burned into it is layered, an identification rune twisted, forced to recognize Potter's name as if he entered under a false school. Crude in concept, sophisticated in execution, Karkaroff sneered. You expect us to believe Hogwarts teachers can divine intent from ash? Snape's lip curled faintly. I expect you to recognize tampering when you see it, Igor. Unless, of course, you'd prefer we wonder why you are so defensive. Karkaroff bristled, but Dumbledore's calm voice cut over him. Severus is correct. This was deliberate. Someone placed Harry's name for reasons we do not yet know. Fleur's hands balled into fists. Reasons? It does not matter the reasons. He will compete, and if he fails, others may suffer for it. What happens in the second task when his lack of training endangers not only him, but another student? Do we wait for disaster to prove your theory? Harry flushed hot. Cedric's hand pressed his shoulder gently. A weight, steady and reassuring. He didn't look at Harry, didn't need to. His words were plain. He didn't do this. You can all argue until sunrise, but Harry didn't enter himself. The blunt certainty seemed to stun the room for a moment. Madame Maxime broke it with a huff. Perhaps not. But it does not matter. The goblet has chosen. Crouch Senior stepped forward, his voice like iron striking stone. The contract is sealed. There is no going back. Mr. Potter will compete. The law binds us as firmly as the magic does. The chamber broke into chaos again. Karkaroff demanding oversight. Fudge lamenting political fallout. Fleur protesting bitterly. McGonagall's sharp brogue rising above them. Snape dissecting the enchantments. And Dumbledore insisting with quiet steel that Harry was a pawn, not a player in this scheme. Through it all, Cedric never moved his hand from Harry's shoulder. Not a wordy defence, not a grand gesture, just a constant, quiet presence. And Harry, standing in the eye of the storm, realised that Dumbledore's swift belief had saved him from being crushed entirely. But the suspicion in the other's eyes made one thing brutally clear. He might be believed here, in this room, by a few. Outside these walls, it would be another story. The argument still echoed in Harry's ears when Dumbledore finally raised his hand. His voice was calm but iron beneath it. That is enough. This discussion will continue among us. Cedric, walk Harry back to his table. Keep him with you. The rest of you remain here. Cedric straightened at once, his grip firm on Harry's shoulder. Come on, he said quietly. His tone carried no judgment, only a steady assurance. Fleur and Crumb fell in behind them, silent shadows as the door creaked open. The moment they stepped back into the great hall, the noise hit like a tidal wave. Harry, did you cheat? How do you do it? You're too young. The hall boiled with voices, accusations hurled from every direction. Students leaned over benches, some jeering, some shouting questions, others whispering furiously. The press had squeezed in at the back, quills scratching like knives across parchment. Harry's chest tightened. The sound swelled around him, every word like a dart. His breath caught short. The air felt thin. He wanted to sink into the floor, vanish into smoke. Cedric pulled him closer, one arm pressed against Harry's back, shielding him from a wave of hands reaching out. Keep walking, he murmured. "Don't listen." His other arm shoved back a Slytherin who leaned too close, eyes glinting with malice. Harry stumbled past the Ravenclaw table. A few students glared, muttering, "Cheat! Frauds!" But Cho sat frozen, her wide eyes locked on him, lips parted as though she wanted to say something but couldn't. Harry barely saw her. His head was swimming. Then, the Durmstrang table erupted. "This is joke!" one boy shouted, slamming his fist on the wood. "Cheat!" another bellowed. "Hogwarts is a dirty slum of liars." Several rose to their feet, their hulking frames moving toward Harry. One shouldered Cedric aside, trying to grab Harry by the sleeve. Cedric's hand shot out, shoving the boy back. "Shut the hell up!" he barked. "Leave him alone!" The Durmstrang boy sneered, then swung. His fist cracked against Cedric's jaw. The hall exploded. Benches screeched back as Hufflepuff surged forward, roaring Cedric's name. Gryffindors leapt up, fists flying. Ravenclaws joined in, some trying to pull people apart, others diving headfirst into the fight. Even a pack of Slytherins stood sneering at the Durmstrang boys. Then Draco Malfoy smirked and threw the first punch. Chaos engulfed the Great Hall. Fred and George were in the thick of it instantly, Fred vaulting a bench to tackle a Durmstrang student, George swinging wildly at another. "You want a fight?" George bellowed. "You've got it!" Ginny was standing high on the Gryffindor table, shouting hexes into the crowd. Ron and Neville were standing just below her, throwing students off if they got near her. The Beauxbaton students shrieked, several drawing their wands to push people back in elegant waves of magic. But it only cleared space for more fists and elbows to crash together. Harry staggered, crushed on all sides. He tried to push through, his chest tightening with panic. The shouts, the fists, the chaos. It pressed in like walls. He couldn't breathe. "Harry!" Hermione's voice cut through. She darted into the fray, grabbing his arm. "This way! Come on!" They shoved forward, dodging a swing. A Durmstrang student lunged for Harry, eyes blazing, and was shoved back hard. Victor Crumb himself stood there, shoulders squared, his glare like iron. "Back off!" he growled, his arm extended, almost shielding Hermione as he nodded towards the doors. "Go!" Now, Harry stumbled after Hermione, Cedric pushing close behind them, shielding Harry's other side. But as they fled the chaos, Harry glanced back. Crumb's fists were clenched tight, rage sparking in his eyes even as he held the line. The Durmstrang Seeker's face was unreadable. Was he defending Harry or just protecting Hermione from his own men? The great doors burst open. Dumbledore strode in, his face thunderous, wand blazing in his hand. Beside him swept Karkaroff, face pale with fury, and Madame Maxime, her booming voice cutting through the din. A single wave of Dumbledore's wand sent a crack like thunder across the hall. The fighting froze, students stumbling back, the air charged with magic so heavy it pinned them where they stood. "Enough!" Dumbledore's voice echoed like a spell itself, commanding silence. "This ends now." The great hall lay in stunned silence. Students shifted back into their seats, some dabbing bloody noses, others glaring daggers across the aisle at rival tables. The smell of sweat and ozone hung thick, the memory of Dumbledore's thundercrack still reverberating in the stones. Karkaroff stormed forward, his pale face blotched with fury. "This is your school, Dumbledore. A disgrace. Durmstrang's honour is mocked by cheats and then attacked by fists like common street thugs." "Attacked?" McGonagall's brogue snapped like a whip. "Your students instigated it. Did you expect ours to sit idle while you slandered them?" Madame Maxime swept forward, towering over both of them, her booming voice cutting in. "Enough! This is shameful for us all. The tournament is meant to unite. Look what we have instead. Chaos. Snape said softly, his eyes gleaming as he scanned the bruised and battered students. Chaos carefully arranged, perhaps. And the boy is in the centre of it. Enough. Dumbledore's voice filled the hall, softer than a roar, but infinitely heavier. This was an ugly moment. I will not see it repeated. His gaze swept the students, sharp and unwavering. The Triwizard Tournament will proceed, but there will be respect. Cornelius Fudge bustled forward, trying to seize control of the narrative. His hat was askew, his face flushed. Yes, ugly business, he said quickly, waving his hands as though brushing dust from the air. But let's not overstate it, eh? Children get carried away, that's all. A little scuffle, nothing more. A scuffle? McGonagall's voice cracked like glass. Minister, students were bloodied in their own hall. Do you call that a scuffle? Fudge ignored her, turning instead toward a cluster of Daily Prophet reporters who had slipped back in during the chaos. You saw it yourselves. Passions ran high, but it is a mark of the tournament's great importance. Why? Such enthusiasm only proves the world is watching Rita Skeeter's quill, scribbled furiously in the background, her eyes darting between Harry and Cedric. Harry felt Cedric's hand on his shoulder again, steady, pulling him slightly back from the press of bodies. Students muttered across the hall, voices low but heated. Hufflepuffs glared daggers at Durmstrang. Gryffindors shoved their way closer to Harry protectively. Ravenclaws argued among themselves, and even a few Slytherins nursed bruises with dark smirks of satisfaction. The air buzzed like a storm about to break again. But Dumbledore raised his wand, and silence snapped back like a leash. His eyes, sharp and weary, cut through the haze of suspicion and bruised pride. This night has gone far enough, he said quietly. The champions will rest. The rest of you will remember who you are, witches and wizards, not brawlers in the street. Go to your dormitories. Now, the spell of authority was unbreakable. Benches scraped, whispers swelled, but the students obeyed. As Harry turned with Cedric and Hermione at his side, he glanced back one last time. The goblet of fire still burned in the emptying hall, its flames tall and eerie, and for just a second, he thought the light flared red again, as though mocking him.